So I wish my recent grad student, Dr. Morgan Richardson Gilley, could be here. She is the first author on this paper, and she spent a whole lot of time in Thailand. I've been to Thailand multiple times as well, but she's done a couple of different pretty engaged internships and things at Chiang Mai University, and so she has a lot more insight. I'm not as knowledgeable about it, and not as fun to listen to as her either, so I apologize for that up front, but she's done a lot of work in this area, and so I'm happy to share some of her findings with you guys today. So just to kind of get us started, it's important to kind of understand big picture that researchers suggested that this positive and statistically significant relationship has existed between rates of higher education completion and then a nation's development. So the more educated that a nation is, the more developed it can also be. And then Thailand in particular, the country where this study is going to be focused around, has really emphasized expanding access to higher education. But we're really struggling with getting, we're getting more women involved in higher education in terms of numbers, but in terms of the educators at the higher education level, those are still very much lacking. And so we don't have enough instructors, enough faculty that are really filling that pipeline for this particular career field, especially in faculties of agriculture, which is like their colleges of agriculture in Thailand. So, next one. So the purpose of this particular study is that we examine the experiences of women ag faculty in Thailand's higher education system. They were all extension education focused as well, and so that's an important piece to kind of throw in there. So we really focused on the barriers and gender issues that women encounter with this particular study. And Thailand was really interesting because it's kind of at this nexus or this intersection of traditional gender stereotypes, but also this kind of emerging and more modern educational system that is kind of taking place in that particular country. And so it's kind of this unique context to study that because it's not developed, it's not, truly this, really extremely poor, poverty-stricken nation, but it's still kind of on the up and rise. And so it's kind of neat to take a look at what some of the issues are that they're facing and kind of compare those to other regions around the world. So when we look at our literature, women faculty remain considerably underrepresented when we look at the big picture. So there's lots of underrepresentation that happens, especially in Thailand's higher education system. And so universities have been acknowledged as these highly gendered institutions, and so they have power structures, they have male dominance that still exists within these particular institutions, and so those are very common. Previous research has told us that, and then women remain particularly marginalized in STEM disciplines such as agriculture that we're talking about today, and so these kind of continue to culminate and kind of create this unique situation, and so this trend is especially true in Thailand when we start to look at what all they're experiencing and what is really shaping this phenomenon and making these experiences, even presenting more challenges for our female faculty in these positions. So some more barriers that women encounter in academia include things like historical male academic culture, and so people at the top, it's kind of a pyramid structure to where only males can get to the top. And so that's kind of an issue that they face. The lack of confidence and then the disinclination of self-promotion. And so they're afraid to talk about what they're really good at. They aren't comfortable with sharing that they're really strong in research or they're really strong in connecting with people. And so they're just not very good self-promoters in this particular area. And then in terms of underrepresentation, they really lack decision-making power still in Thailand and particularly across Southeast Asia. So they have access to land ownership, but they don't consider themselves able to really make powerful decisions around that, and that transfers to higher education decisions as well, just because of that common lack of land ownership availability there. The exclusion from political aspects of academic appointments, and so even though they may have positions, they may not have the political knowledge or the political capital to be able to navigate some of those issues that might arise. And so that really complicates their ability to move up the ladder in terms of upper level positions or even getting into the basic level of a faculty position in Thailand. And so just this lack of women faculty positions in general is really important to talk about, especially in extension education. It's growing, but there's still a lot of male dominance in terms of extension in Thailand. So that brings us to our philosophical lens. So we use something called critical constructionism, and that's really where we're combining a theoretical perspective in terms of what we're looking at, as well as an epistemological position. And so social constructionism really thinks about how an individual views their reality and makes sense of that in terms of the world around them. Meanwhile, critical theory takes a look at critical power imbalances and tries to bring that together. So why we use these two different lenses to kind of look at this and combine those was because we wanted to think about power imbalances. We wanted to think about issues of how women have been marginalized, but we also wanted to get to the story of the essence of their lived experiences and tell that story through the lens of a more critical perspective. And so this particular lens really lent itself to this particular study. So our methodology, we used an instrumental case study design from Stair. Our study was bounded by place as well as participants' occupation. So they were all from Thailand. They were all extension faculty there in Thailand University. And so we started with Chiang Mai. That's where we have the most experience with in Thailand, which is in northern parts. There are other agricultural universities. So we were able to kind of use the dean at the Chiang Mai University to kind of get us started with some recommendations on who to reach out to in terms of our purposeful sample. And then from that, they were able to snowball and provide other recommendations for other female faculty that we could interview from this as well. Interviews were recorded, and then we also collected participant photographs. So we asked them to actually submit a photograph of what so a representation of photo that would kind of describe or depict what their career was in terms of some of the challenges, some of the power imbalances, or just a representation of what they did in their institution. And they also wrote reflections around those photographs that they submitted so that we could get an understanding of what their interpretation was of what was going on in the photo as well. So in terms of our analysis, we use Savonia's coding processes, the first two cycles. So we use first cycle coding methods. Those were initial and values coding, and then second cycle was more of a pattern coding approaches, and from that, we were able to distill our themes. So our themes were these gender disparities in our first theme. The second theme was talking about these barriers to success in academia. And the third was these perceptions of self as well as gender in agriculture and higher education. So they did have this very positive view overall, but they still face challenges that are pretty unique when we think about the context of higher education as well as agriculture and extension education as well. So the first theme, women are becoming more accepted as agricultural faculty. There are some positions, there are women that do exist as extension faculty at institutions of higher education in Thailand. More women are joining agricultural extension programs at the community level, so they're starting to engage more in those services. The participants also discussed some traditional gender stereotypes that existed as well. And they observed our males being more promoted to higher leadership positions. And so that was commonly referred to in the interviews. And so they talked about a lot of how all of their direct reports were male. At all levels of higher education, it was male very much dominance that persisted there. And so they had the decision making and political power to make decisions in their everyday lives. They also had this greater preference to hire males in agricultural disciplines for more leadership-based positions as well. So they talked about this. One particular kind of quote I want to highlight here is people want to talk with males more than females in higher education. And so when they want their opinion on something, they feel like that they go to males more often than the females still. And so I thought that was a pretty powerful, salient quote that kind of captured this really well. In terms of our barriers to success in academia, females focus on family and the necessity of a flexible career. And so they're talking about this work-life balance that kind of has to happen because they're very much, have to take care of their children, have to take care of the household still. And so they explored the assumption that academia was hard work and more sustainable for men as well in this particular theme. And they mentioned that upward movement and career progression was limited for women. They could get in at the very basic, faculty levels, but they could never really aspire from their perspective to reach those higher level positions. That was just not something that was going to be accessible to them or realistic overall. And so a quote here is, the barrier is that I have to spare some time for taking care of the family. and my work suffers. So they have to take care of these family responsibilities, the cooking, the cleaning, all those domestic chores, and that's going to take time away from their job. And so it's really hard to succeed because they're often viewed as still kind of this domestic help in their particular context. Kind of last theme here was that they did talk very positively about their, like they saw a lot of progress that has happened in their country in their lifetimes. They saw lots of things that have changed and all that. And so they did have these positive self-perceptions of what they could do, what their peers could do that were other women as faculty. And so they viewed themselves as very capable. And these observations were that there were more women entering the field, there were more female undergraduate as well as graduate students, and overall they felt very respected in their careers, but there were still obviously these barriers that were preventing them from moving on up into higher levels. And so they said most females in this department have some capability have the same capability as a male, so they think they could do the same job, they're just not getting the same opportunities extended to them overall. Kind of leads us to our conclusions. That's that Thailand's agricultural sector, including its higher education sector, remains very male-dominated. It's a highly gendered institution, provide more significant barriers for female faculty, especially those in extension. Our findings do suggest that women are becoming more accepted in terms of faculty positions, and so they're able to actually break into that role, but it's still, they're not able to move up in terms of career progression very much. Our findings also suggested that societal expectations regarding women's roles provide a significant barrier, and so that's a really big important part of that. These family responsibilities, taking care of their children, making sure that cooking, cleaning, all of that is taken care of, is really preventing them from what they think of moving on in their career, as well as the lots of opportunity and representation in some higher education administration roles. They also had these positive self-perceptions about their gender. They felt just as capable as their male counterparts. They felt respected in their roles, but again, they just weren't given the same opportunities as some of their male counterparts. So some recommendations are that despite participants' perceptions, findings suggested there were trends that did not extend to upper level academics positions. We recommend that both research into why women retain these lower level positions and leadership programs designed to address these issues moving forward. So we need some more programming, some more awareness around why these women are capable and how to get them in these particular positions overall. More research into women's perceptions was also recommended to avoid potential setbacks and unintentional discrimination that may exist as well. And so, just because they see themselves as getting more access to power, getting more access to opportunities, doesn't mean that that is the end-all be-all. There still needs to be more progress, obviously, in terms of what that looks like. Because of the major barrier that familial roles present, we recommend that additional research be conducted to examine how family dynamics might serve as a barrier for women in academia specifically as well, and how we can promote a culture that can allow them to have that work-life balance a little bit better as well in Thailand. And then last slide, because of the combination of existing positive self-perceptions and then continuing inequalities, we recommend that research explore how to open women's eyes to gender-based equalities in Thailand. Like I said, they were very positive in how they talked about themselves, and they viewed themselves as highly empowered. They just weren't getting those opportunities and how to begin to have conversations at various levels so that they could begin to open up some additional ways to move up in terms of positions, and so that they can have these leadership roles in the future at institutions of higher education. That concludes my presentation. Thank you guys. I'm open for any questions.
All right, who's going to start us off? Perfect.
As a male researcher working in this field, can you talk about the subjectivity process and how you continue to be reflexive?
Yeah, so this was my grad student's work. She's the primary author on it, but I am a co-author, and so yeah, I think I definitely have to check my perspective, and we do meet as like a research team when we're going through our analysis and talking through coding and all that kind of stuff, and so that's part of the conversation playing into it. I'm saying I see this, and she's saying, well, I see this, this, and this. You know what I mean? And so we have to come at it and check our biases from a male perspective and say, all right, that's good to see it, from your lens. And so I think we do that through kind of peer debriefing and then that negotiation process of the themes and how we are able to talk through those and not just accept something blindly. So I think it definitely influences it. And those are conversations that we have in my office all the time about, this is what I'm seeing, and she's like, no, that's not what I see at all. And so that's something good to think about for sure. Yes?
Yeah, this was a great presentation and study. I'm curious, and I know your angle wasn't this specifically, but curriculum, has that shifted, or what role can looking at making curriculum more gender responsive and sensitive play in all of this?
I think that's huge. Yeah, I think that's going to be a major shift in terms of this. They're seeing lots of women that are wanting to be extension agents, and they're seeing more their classes filled with women and that kind of stuff. But it's obviously the curriculum at the very basis of it is very much more male driven and male perspective and all of that. And so I think by getting more women into the fields and helping them see that, that's what the last slide opened their eyes to what the issues are that exist, because that in their culture they're kind of taught not to question. And so this critical lens is very antithetic, I guess, to what their philosophy is. And so I think helping them understand how some of these issues could be preventing them and creating additional barriers would be very important to them moving forward. So I think curriculum is a huge piece of this moving forward. Yes?
And I know this is your students, but were any males interviewed, especially those that faculty males? I'm wondering if they saw this as being a problem or a challenge on having enough people.
So yeah, I know anecdotally, just my time working at Chiang Mai, I did do a lot of kind of work with them, and I know them pretty well, but their dean is very aware of the issue. It's just, convincing other people that are on the faculty searches and things like that, that they need to get more women in these positions. And so that's definitely an issue. No men were, for this particular study, they weren't included, but we definitely have heard that from men when we've been there and working in Chiang Mai in particular, yeah. Awesome.
Other questions?
Good stuff.
So, like it was discussed, obviously, we know the issues and the social issues that these women face of having family responsibilities, but also neglecting work. And so you mentioned opening the women's eyes, but from your researcher's perspective, or even from the women's perspective, what were some of the things that they said they can do to change that social structure so that these changes can happen? Because we know the issue.
So we know what the issues are, but how do we make these changes? Okay. Yeah, I think their main issue was that I got from this study was that they can get into some faculty roles and positions now. That's happening, but they're not able to move up. And so they want to be able to go for those more administrative roles and lead their programs and things like that. But that's not an opportunity that can currently happen from their perspective. And so their goal is to create more awareness around that, maybe some leadership programming to get them the resources and education they need to take on some leadership administrative roles, because even that access isn't there currently. And so that's something that I think is a very realistic kind of implication from this, is that they kind of desire some more leadership opportunities and they're not getting that, and they don't have access to classes or coursework that would kind of prepare them for that currently. So.
Can I spin that?
Yeah.
Okay, so females in higher education is such an interesting phenomenon. But there's a great book, if you guys are interested, it's called Tripping the Prom Queen. It's fantastic. But it talks about how often the hardest people on women faculty are women faculty. So if you could take that kind of idea, are these ladies saying, hey, we need to tap these grad students and make sure that we have female representation in that next generation? Or are they still just trying to figure out, how do I climb the ladder without
I think it's
helping
more
somebody up?
me-centered from my understanding of it currently, but I think that's important. I think they want more females in the profession as well, you know what I mean? But I think they're currently hey, I think I could do a better job in this leadership role. How do I get there? Because it's not currently available to me. So I think that's where they are currently, but I think they also want to increase access overall. But I think that's an important part of that. I've heard some of that. I've served on some search committees where I've heard some women have comments about other women, and I'm like, good grief. They, the color of nail polish they had on that day, I was like, why is that even an important thing to talk about in a hiring decision? I don't know, so. Most definitely. So all of that's important. But yeah, I think currently it's still very me-focused from their lens because they're wanting to move up, but they didn't have that access currently.
That makes sense. Perfect. Thank you very much.